Right. So I'm sure after this stimulating lecture this morning and the tea and coffee we've had, we will continue to have reflection and debate. This two sessions this afternoon is to remember two colleagues, Abdul ever since he joined it. And as I told Kate, his national assembly or an event of any type in his absence, because he was physically, but his ideas, his papers, humanity really enriched both our intellectual and social. Adebayo Olukushi reminded me this morning that Abdul came to a governance institute, and the two were the most outstanding members of that institute when he directed it. And life's irony would have it that we're celebrating their lives at this General Assembly. Raufu, as we called him, was prolific in very many. He worked on the African state aspect of the African state and the consequences of the nature of the state, particularly Nigeria, but in the continent as a whole. So I'm really privileged to be facilitating this session when we will be celebrating the works and life of most Decembers who is no longer with us. And as another lack would be, the celebration of and reflection of Rauf's work is a continuation of the debate we had this morning. What is the implication of ethnic mobilization? How do we reverse the type of ethnic mobilization that's violent and very destructive to our continent at the moment? And how do we establish interfaith relations so that our could be something that destroyed our continent? For a new social contract, which is also a continuation of the debate of this morning, that we have to reverse the current trend. And we have been told this morning, and it's easy for those of us who are old, that it is the fate of the new generation, that social contract to the fore and take this continent to a better. Without much ado, I would like to call on Professor Abdul from the University of Ibadan. And when I get him, he said he will enrich our understanding of who he is and what his intellectual and social legacy is.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As the chair, same generation, the generation of the Olukoshis, of Sagai. So for me, it's a privilege to stand before you to expression of a humanist. But permit me to start this by thank his wife and partners has served an academic of distinction. Because the story I'm about to narrate is actually her story. She made it possible. I remember that at the celebration of Raufu in Abuja, people turned to the wife because former students, friends, for all the generosity and all the love and support that she gave to her husband and her friend over the years, which made it possible for him to do all of those things that he did, and also made it possible for her to also be, a highly rated scholar in her own right. So, Prof, for this. Just about 15 hours who actually came alive in one of the sessions. Nimi, are you here? Yes. Please, can you stand up so I can see you? Yes. His former student actually dedicated her presentation to him and also added that one that brought her to Codestra. Incidentally, I think we all agree, seminal present on intellectual history with a focus on the work of Codestra in the context. And, I was thinking that it is in fact that teachers never die. Their worth are reflected in the work of their students and their students, and has been Raufu. Distinguished activist, firm believer in the unity practice, and of course, as I said a few minutes ago, an exceptional family man. On August 8, 2017, at what those of us who are his friends consider a very 63. He had so much left to give, and it is unfortunate that he had to go when he is. But as I said, invariably, teachers of distinction never die. In the unforgettable values, ideas, and actions that they leave behind. Raufu had his family roots in learning. For those of us who know Nigeria, of the Western Nigeria, which is another, the Igbo and places, including Kano, Sokoto, and Zaria. So it's not surprising. He actually is a polyglot in the major Nigerian languages. People speak Yoruba. That of a particular person, also in a very complex country. But the opportunities they had from primary school university, exposed to the diversity of Nigeria, and therefore tempered, turning away from a perception that will be informed by ethnic or religious another negative, able to rise above. And you could see that in his work as an activist. Those who have commented on this, interestingly, celebrated across continent. Celebrated in Nigeria. In fact, there was some kind of competition to do that because he lived such a very full and wonderful life. So he had his primary schools all over Nigeria. Then he moved to ABU for his undergraduate and master's degrees. Before he moved on to Oxford, where he completed his PhD thesis at St. Peter's College, supervision of government in 1990. And politics. Before the PhD at Bayero and the famous Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in ABU, noted almost radical center of intellectual excellence in the late 70s. In the late 70s and 80s, the center of immobilism, if I can put it that way. Now, in the words of somebody very close to him, Professor Bangura, Raufu was able to break ranks with the tendency to, but also of radical political economists in the 80s who tended to ignore or under. So it was a fine balance. I could see the role, but you could also see that while some people were overplaying the ethnic card or not fully understanding religion, it was also wrong in the Nigerian and larger African context to right away ethnicity on the card. So that was a kind of person, concrete, and that reflected in much of his work. So, for instance, study the but also look at the class dimensions, and therefore have a more rounded perspective. Scholarship. He made important contributions to the work of the United Nations Research Institute on Social Development, UNRISD, especially the project on ethnic inequalities and public sector governance, as well as to the program on horizontal inequalities and conflict at the Center for Research on Inequality, Human Security and Ethnicity at Queen Elizabeth House in Oxford. So essentially, he was located as an academic at the center of a progressive Nigeria and a member of the Zaria group, among others. This was a group that immersed not only in radical theory, but he met his wife, who is here with us, at a conference in Sheffield in 1988, and they subsequently got married in Toronto. She was originally Canadian. Called that in Mustapha, Mustapha, born in 1993, and born in 1990. His friends, colleagues, and students attest to the fact that the story I love and understand. Because the general his wife then, even in terms because all of this is home a lot of his friends and students. Raufu lived a full life of scholarship and service that straddled local, national, and international terrains. He was at home with the urban and rural his professional life. At Oxford University, he serves and political with interest in such critical areas as environmental management and nations, religion, federalism, conflict and conflict resolution, and democracy. Among others. What contributors an article as the Guardian of London, the BBC, the Mail and Guardian of South Africa, and of course, Premium Times of Nigeria, among others. Publications: Gulliver's Troubles, Nigeria's Foreign Policy After the Cold War, 2008. Turning Point Democracy, a major and rich intervention in that field, 2010. Conflicts and Security in West Africa, 2013. Sects and Social Disorder, Muslim Conflict in Northern Nigeria, 2014. And Creed and Grievances, Muslim-Christian Relations and Conflict Resolution in published in addition to one of his most publics on more of the poor of structural adjustment, one of the most cited of his works, was written on unreached project in the early excellent capacity for field is but along with his helpful style in teaching and supervision, to be able to confirm that is fair and establish communities that during field work in a context of rigor and sensitive engagement. His service to Africa and other African and other networks is widely acknowledged. He served on the boards of research centers, journals, newspapers, and was consultant to international think. He also participated actively in the work of God Israel, of course. Madam Chair has said that, including as a member of its scientific he devoted the last school of his to critically examining the challenges posed in northern Nigeria, including, of course, Boko Haram. He thus helped to create a transnational Nigeria research network of scholars to study Muslim identities, movements, and Muslim-Christian relations. This initiative was funded by the Foreign Ministry. He literally worked to the last minute. Precisely on July 12, 2017, his Skype discussion with Dr. Nicholas Awati, the Director of Research on Governance Research, PASGA, to review progress, growth in our, that Raufu in it was no working script. Alas, he did this assignment, and Pascal has promised to make sure that the work is complete, partly due to his contributions to the whole process. Madam Chair, and give testimonies in regard of Raufu's humaneness and doggedness in using theory, practice, policy, and pedagogy in the service of human whole and Africans in particular. It is important to end this presentation, parted brother and colleague, with what others have said about him, which in his statement said, and I quote, is relevant, widely discussed, cherished, and avidly utilized. The lived experiences of Africans in diverse brain, Rahim, a renowned scientist, Nigeria, in African, and will be remembered as a and a great who devoted his life. His life is believed a better society, and we all have a role in bringing it about. In other words, his life was about constructing a better society. Raufu, but also among what Allah has to say. Beyond his brilliant academic engagements, Professor was a dogged fighter of the ideological left. However, ideology for him is not for its own sake. It is in how we use human condition. It is on how it can bring emancipation to those in the bondage of neocolonialism, economic exploitation, religious bigotry, chauvinism, diseases, and political subjugation of any form. Owen and David Earhart of us for being colleagues and developers, while just in their development. He was more gave to bring people in and supervise far outside his own interests, and always did so keeping an open mind. As he inspired and shaped a lot of people. His comments always, he was extraordinary these personal contacts and made himself available as a mentor. End of quotation. Finally, Madam Chair, colleagues, I hereby present Professor Abdul Raufu Mustapha, an academic, policy advocate, activist of the highest order. We are most pleased, and to whom we express our gratitude for his labor of love and dedication. Lived among us. For that labor not to be in vain, however, we must go forth to celebrate this by committing to those ideals of teaching, of research. He has been widely acclaimed and loved in return. Thank you very much.
Very much. Indeed, contribution both continentally and within the council area, of course, was really of a very high magnitude. What I retained from Bangura's very celebration of his work and his life was friends in Ahmadu Bello University decided that there was a progressive governance they wanted to join in. He decided he was going to remain an autonomous scholar and continue teaching, advocating for change. And it resonated for me because we have the same kind of reality at that particular moment in my country. And therefore he could be a policy advocate, but not sell out his own autonomous vision of the way forward. The next speaker is going to be a family member, and as usual, his lifelong partner and colleague, intellectual colleague, whose work benefited mutually, whose partnership was mutually beneficial, both to their intellectual work. And I want to quote Kate, herself a distinguished scholar in her own right.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's really an honor to be asked to speak on behalf of a family headed by his father, young Ishola Mustapha of Okeak in Nigeria, with numerous uncles and aunts, his 18 brothers and sisters, and uncountable numbers, and of course our own children. And I would like to express my gratitude to Codestria for commemorating Raufu. Codestria always held a special place in Raufu's heart, and a privilege to share Raufu's life, but our children were born when Raufu would come. And he was not a man for big conferences. The African Studies Association in the US twice, and one of the times was because it was held in my hometown of Toronto. He never went to the ASA UK, even though he was there in the UK. He never went to the European Conference on the European African Studies Association. He never went to the Development Studies Association. He said that they spoke about Africa in a way that he just couldn't relate to. On the one hand, there was the eclectic and exotic stories that he felt were completely irrelevant. Such things, bell ringers in Kenya, after a seminar that was held at the African History and Politics seminar in Queen Elizabeth House in Oxford, which was a seminar on a community of 10 or 12 bell ringers, upholders of the British tradition of ringing bells. And he said, what does that have to do with the economic and political African societies? He found such things very frustrating. But he also found the focus on corruption and poverty and patrimonialism very unhelpful. He would say, in many cases, what they're saying is not technically untrue of African societies. While he shied away from big Africa conferences, he missed a Codestria event if he could help it. He deeply valued Codestria's commitment to the promotion of an African grounded in African experience. At Codestria, he participated in a community of scholars, emotional and intellectual richness of African societies, and who didn't just long for alternative perspectives true to African realities. Raufu was struck, he actually repeated it more than once, working on a paper and looking for a reference to back up something that he'd written. To him, you don't have to cite some random scholar to support what you know about your own society. Just make. And that was something that really meant a lot to him. Life's little coincidences that this event should follow a keynote address by Wole Soyinka. The Years of Childhood was one of Raufu's favorite books. He really valued that writing, although he did have some reservations about Professor Soyinka's views on Boko Haram. Ake encapsulated Raufu's experience of the meaningfulness and colonial institutions. It was the tale of a clever but rascally young boy growing up in India. And it showed how indigenous Yoruba beliefs and practices wove together with world religions, rapid social and economic change, political activism and resistance, and a thirst for higher education, in a way in which each enriched. Raufu also grew up in colonial Nigeria, in a typical Yoruba family. I say typical, but not stereotypical. For one thing, Raufu was at least fourth generation urban. There really wasn't an agricultural bone in his body. Despite the patrilineal character of Yoruba society, Raufu grew up in a household, successful trader in chemicals. Yoruba Muslim family he grew up in, as mentioned already, he grew up in the Igbo Christian area of southeastern Nigeria. And to this day, the families speak to each other in Igbo in their sitting room in Ilorin when they don't want other people to understand what they're saying. Raufu understood creative and innovative potential of indigenous handicrafts when he spoke of indigenous institutions. He meant the rich institutional landscape of African society, institutional stability, of social integration, of conflict resolution and land tenure. And he was both fascinated by and impassioned with the ways in which those institutions, in fact, changed and created new kinds of tools for development and social transformation. He didn't see indigenous institutions as either or, as African versus Western. He understood integration as a matter of statecraft, the ability to combine institutions of grassroots legitimacy with colonial in pursuit of national transformation. When graduate students were reflecting on his work, the contribution they mentioned the most was a chapter he wrote called Back to the Future, Multi-Ethnicity and the State. This chapter at the strengths of and ways of institutional integration across religious lines could be useful for solving some modern problems. Raufu was not romantic about indigenous institutions, but he had the development of modern institutions to struggle against the irresponsibility of leadership and to contribute of African societies. He also saw Islam and Christianity as part of the historical fabric of African societies. He emphasized the long history of institutions of integration and conflict resolution within Nigeria and more broadly across Africa. In fact, he spent most of the last 10 years, as was mentioned by the lovely tribute given by the last speaker, focusing on the collaborative research on northern Nigeria, which has given rise to a trilogy of research, not all of which is yet published. The first one, as mentioned, Sects and Social Disorder, was about Muslim-Muslim conflicts in northern Nigeria. The second, Grievance, was about Muslim-Christian conflict and was completed while he was in hospital. After an operation, he had 6 weeks free of teaching and administrative obligations. And he commented that it was such a shame that it takes something like this to do his writing. But he asked me to bring his, and he worked during the day and visited with friends during. It's typical of Raufu to always be a little bit behind on his deadlines, which means that he has still a few more books coming out. There's a third book in the trilogy on religious extremism in northern Nigeria, which confronts Boko Haram, and that should be coming out next year. He also has an edited Information and Inclusive Growth in Africa, which was carried out by a team of research scholars at PAS in Nairobi. That one also should be coming out in another year or so. And a chapter on democratizing electoral, which was provocatively entitled Better Elections, More Deaths. Though I think they've adjusted the title. There's one further reason I have to have a special place in my heart for Codesria. It was at the Codesria Scientific Committee meeting in December 2016, last most fully himself. He had some seafood pepper soup on the final night of the meeting. You know Raufu and his pepper soup or roast meat. It sometimes got him into trouble. And when he got home, his stomach was bothering him. He thought it was the pepper soup, but it actually turned out to be something more serious. But it was as he was at that last Codesria meeting that I like to remember him. And institution building for national transformation with old friends and looking forward to a good pepper soup at the end of the day. When Raufu was beset by things, he used to remember a time when he was in his political activism days and organized to go down to, from Zaria down to a meeting in Port Harcourt. And transport hadn't been arranged and things were a bit chaotic. And they just had to scramble together and hitchhike down on the back of a truck from Zaria. And it was raining heavily. And they were all feeling very dejected and stressed out and frustrated. And then somebody noticed on the vehicle in front of them that said, "Why worry when you can pray?" And they all burst out laughing, and it lightened the mood. I would like to thank you all for listening to these reflections and for so kindly. It's a real honor to hold Raufu in this kind of esteem, and I am very, very grateful. Let me just say, Olong Forijimo, Allah Yajikanchi, and ideally I should follow. That's one of the many ways in which Raufu remains irreplaceable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to underscore what Kate just said. In fact, when he was here for the last meeting, it was as a member of the review committee of the Codesria intellectual agenda. I urge Codesria, as was said in their celebration of his life, that his last work and their recommendation be taken on seriously. But lastly, I would like Kate, for herself, and to please extend to the children our thanks for sharing their father during a month, which was a milestone for them. Thank you very much. I would like to call on the Vice President of Codesria to please come forward, Professor Fo. Oh. Yeah, please. We have a little gift for the family. Thank you.
For anything that Mustapha has been for us as a member of the community, for his exceptional contribution to the progress of social science in Africa and around the world, for the specific services that he has rendered to Codesria as an institution, And in memory of the late Mustapha, we would like you to receive this humble token, humble gift, which will remind of each of the member of Mustapha's family what he has really been for us. That is a great man for Africa, but for the world as a whole. He was a great man that deserved the recognition from his peers.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to call on the panelists to please come forward. I know that we're standing between you and lunch, as efficient as possible in time. But as I said this morning, it so happens, genius of those who organized this conference, or by coincidence, there is a continuity between the keynote address, what we just Raufu, and the subsequent theme that will be discussed at this moment. On the panelists to come forward. And it is going to be on the theme of the state in Africa, and for those perhaps who know the work of Raufu, to link it up to some of his work and his findings. We're going to start with Ken from Raya University, Kenya, and his paper will be The African Nation State and the Globalization, Theorizing, Fictionalizing the African Condition, Globalizing and Cannibal Nation State. I am afraid I will only give you 10 minutes, so please.
For those of us who have come to settle here, the locals look at us with 1,000 eyes. Now, those are not my words. Those are the words of Mtima, a character in the novel that I'm about to discuss, who has moved to UK, and she's saying that the people in UK are looking at her with 1,000 eyes. That statement has a lot to do with globalization and migration. And in the morning, Professor Wole Soyinka did articulate important points about this movement, a movement of people. But of course, globalization entails movement of ideas and technology and etc. Why do Africans like Mtima move? Well, for this, we may have to turn to an African philosopher based in the US. His name is Olufemi Taiwo. That people move to some place else. Human, natural, very normal desire for better life. In other words, people move, like Mtima does, because they feel their desire is unfulfilled or unfulfillable in their native countries. So they move elsewhere. It's a very natural thing to do. What doesn't say, however, is that when you immigrate to another country, the locals look at you with 1,000 eyes. Muhammad Said Muhammad, the novelist whose work focus our attention here, does say through that character that they look at you with 1,000 eyes. In his book, Dunia Yao, which means in Swahili, their world. I do not want to go into the politics and poetics of why Syed Ahmed Muhammad, a prolific writer, writing in Swahili and has about 60 titles to his name beyond the Swahili phone world. That is something for another day. But I'll briefly say something about this particular novel. Dunia Yao. It is a story of Ndi, not Mtima. It is a story of Ndi. Ndi is a civil servant who is aged out of society, out of work, and out of a system that is inherent and is driven by self-interest. Narrator of his own tragic fall from a position of influence at work and at home to the place of need. We encounter a character who is in a permanent mental stupor. So Ndi comes across as an unreliable and incoherent narrator who is always Ndi narrates his story to his daughter. And then the occasional omniscient narrator intervenes and says, na hadithi ya Ndi sasa si hadithi yake mwenyewe tu, bali ni hadithi ya jirani na pia wananchi wenzake. Kwa kweli ni hadithi ya nchi yake. And this story is not just his story alone, but the story of his neighbor and also his fellow countrymen. Indeed, it is the story of his country. What are we reminded of in this instance? It is Jameson's postulate on the allegory of the nation, in which the third world text is necessarily the story of the nation, of the individual mentioned in that particular story. This is also the story of the nation. Shall we say the story which was a preoccupation for the late Raufu, as we have heard from the previous presentations. But the story of Ndi is also the story of his nation. But this world spectacularly falls apart. In other words, there are forces that are causing this disintegration of a family, of a man, and indeed of a nation, an African nation. I am arguing in my paper that the novelist not narrativizes the teeming disarray in Africa. He is actually, and he theorizes on any number of issues that have a lot to do with globalization, including what globalization does to individuals and communities, collectivities, as far as technologies, Americanization is concerned. He talks about all these things almost like Jameson does, but in a more manner. Before the chair looks at me with 1,000 eyes, I think I'll just pick on one of those things. Let me talk about movement. Migration. Mtima is who has moved to, as I said earlier, to the UK. And she writes an email to her father. By the way, she is the only one with whom he communicates. He is in his heart. But thanks to globalization, thanks to technology, he's able to communicate with this one daughter. She writes this email. Na akina sisi tulokuja kulowea huku, kila wakati tunatazama kaja kuna raha zetu, kaja na njaa yake huyu, kaja kuchafua mazingira yetu huyu, kaja kutuletea maradhi na kuchukua nafasi zetu za kazi, kaja. For the local every day with 1,000 eyes. They have come to get crushed into our pleasure, these ones. Some of their hunger, these ones. They have come to pollute our environment. They have brought us disease and distress. They have come to take up our jobs. They have come. Mtima's voice. A hostile London, moved as it is from the magnificent London of Vassanji's novel, The Gunnysack, which he reads, seamlessly changes into mimicry of the xenophobic underpinnings of the English populace, with everyone looking at her with 1,000 eyes. Well, this experience is reminiscent of Moada of Africa who have moved out of Africa. Life remains unfulfilled and unfulfilled. So they experience what we know has been the experience of one Yaya Toure or Aubameyang or Raheem Sterling, the footballers who have appeals thrown at them. So ask them if you are in doubt that the reception there is good. In England's icy weather and the icy reception from the English peoples is juxtaposed with the of the tourists in her native island nation, where let loose to maraud as they please. The limitless freedom of the sex tourists back home is a stark contrast to the suffocating tag, the unwanted and unwelcome African immigrant in Europe, and this has been well articulated by Shoyinga in his presentation earlier on. In other words, the paradox is Mtima's quest for a better life remains in England unfulfilled and unfulfillable. Why? Because of the imbalances between the Africans who are moved by forces of globalization to relocate to the global north and the Europeans who freely moved to the global south to fulfill a whole range of human and, if you like, animalistic desires. What accounts for this imbalance? The thrust of Mohammed's novel is that the disparity between the global north and the global south is bound up with the hegemony powers. And now you can be sure that the chair is looking at me with 1,000 eyes. The 1,000 words. The forces of globalization, the novel seems to suggest, emanate from by the Western Imperium. That position is brought into sharp relief when the director named B. Mize na chanzo cha hali hii chatoka kwingineko. The source of all this elsewhere. As far as this nation or nation state is concerned, therefore, African problems have their sources elsewhere. And in this, I argue that we meet the weakest link in his theory, because he ignores Africa's own complicity, including how Africans, in fact, sold their own in times of slavery. I really appreciate the honor and privilege of being on this panel in memory of our departed friend. And to Kate and to the family, all I can say, right, perhaps feel the pain in your heart, but we share in your loss and sorrow. Thank you very much.
For harassing our speaker. We are running out of time, and I have been told to try and be very efficient with this session. And now, and with that in mind, and thanking the last speaker, I would Coimbra University had the privilege to visit last year. Sovereignty and legal pluralism, collective forms of power, contesting and yet strengthening African states. Thank you. 10 minutes.
Since good morning, bonjour, salam alaikum, habari. Since I am not an English-speaking person, I'll stick to my notes, and I'll ask Isabel, since I don't have eyes in my back, to call my attention before my 2 minutes before my 10 minutes run away, please. I would like, first of all, to thank very deeply Khadija for the opportunity to present some reflections by the late Professor Mustapha Raufu, whose intellectual legacy and the dialogue that he always stimulated us to think about and to think beyond the contradictions that we live in regarding the historically still present institutions. I have to tell you that the first time I met Professor Raufu, it was at Khadija. We had a very intellectual discussion that stretched much longer after the session. And I think this is one of the things that characterizes Khadija. We meet very, and only after 3 hours did I find out that he was the author of the book I was criticizing, where one of the articles written by himself touched upon Mozambique. So he was a very humble academic and always told me, as you just mentioned, that go ahead, be brave, stick to your point, make strong arguments. That's the way to form new generations of African academics. So thank you, wherever you are. Raufu, as you told me to call you, thank you for showing me that we need to be brave. We need to stick to our points. My discussion with him was regarding Eduardo Mondlane's comment regarding the Mozambicans. Before intellectual reference was killed in the late 1960s. He was interviewed regarding the role of the colonial state. At that time said something like that: we might have no chance to inherit anything from Portugal, but start with what is available. And what is available is the colonial state. This was the argument I had with Raufu, what to do with this big part of us, but it's not the whole. As this morning, Walt Schowinka told us, our epoch is characterized by contradictory forms of globalization. Common to them is the articulation of struggles between communities, organizations, movements that have been generating new knowledge in that communication as key elements to decolonize the political structures we live in. This shared knowledge has been made possible by relearning to conceptualize notions of personhood, citizenship, state, and sovereignty in a relational matter experience with the present world. A key political factor in statehood in Africa is its colonial history. The logic of analyzing, defining, and regulating otherness, Africa and its inhabitants, as almost an empty space devoid of any political knowledge or institutions. And this project, that's still very much present, has been analyzing here, produced two realities. The reality was a globalized project imposed by colonialism, and the other is local, very limited, theoretically, forms of political organization with local value and significance. And this was a very interesting point that Raufu always reminded us, that we need to think from Africa as part of the global and not just a particular. So this project, this colonial project, quite often that's still present in some of our minds, and the normative processes we live in, things insists and impinging upon us this thing of like from a theoretical perspective, the state has jurisdiction over its populations, as we all learn in school, in order to administrate the inhabitants. Many African states have adopted democratic systems of representation and consultation, indicative of various forms of democracy inside the state. This is very important when you're talking about justice. At the core of the nation state is the idea that the state has a source of legitimate law. Here, the rule of law always refers to a state which at the same time and respects certain rights of individuals. In this sense, the state legitimates itself in a situation where the rule of law as the supreme sovereign power, controlled and regulated by the legal structure. This is the question that we are living in. A modern state is replicating quite often Eurocentric principles inherited from the previous Eurocentric liberal, from the Eurocentric tradition, where we have individual rights, respect for private property, and adherence to the rules of the free market. And just to give the example of Mozambique or Angola, just to name a few, we are supposedly at the surface modern states, but in practices, although rule of law, we are also living and experiencing other legal systems that constitute. And this legal plurality present challenges this very narrow representation of justice and the state and the these other sources of law are very important and very significant, not just because they are local, but also because they belong to and they entail other belongs to other forms of representation and presence, such as the Islamic system in Mozambique that is quite often. In this sense, and despite the pervasiveness and juridical equality identified in modern sovereignty, sovereignties vary both due to the neo-colonial geopolitics and other non-statistic conceptions of sovereignty. Therefore, one of the guardian representation of the state as a modern and a rational form of unitary governance is a clear sign how community justices, the other justices, are still existing in a limbo, questioning the core elements of modern states. Are we citizens of states or citizens in states? In this sense, this reality reveals this conflict between being in state or off state. It's an ongoing struggle, bottom-up, regarding other cultural and epistemological references absent from this idea about the modern state. As the reality studied in various African countries, and I'm getting back to that book that I had a long discussion with Raufu about, sovereign power is associated with the capacity to bear rights. Indeed, the colonial reality that quite often we still experiment is a clear example of a paradoxical abyssal exclusion, the creation of non-beings, of non-citizens, to justify the violence and the presence of foreign powers, like the presence of the modern state, and later on insisting that other forms of conflict are part of the representation of the state. Therefore, it is important to examine the extent to which the state has used the law to maintain a particular form of governmentality about justice, a reality that is increasingly contested by the citizens and the other authorities, quite often transformed into local traditional authorities, which is another problematic issue. That dispute of what counts as justice reflects the aspiration of African Union Agenda 2063, wishful of a stronger African citizenry. If this is the challenge, how can we use our knowledges, our experiences, to democratize our democracies, incorporating African political and judicial? This was a challenge that Raufu posed to us. And this is one of the questions that I tried and I've been trying to address Mozambique and Angola. Getting back to the argument and carrying on from Mamdani, colonialism embodied a well-defined political cultural model methodically imposed on Africa so that colonizers could govern in an effective and sustainable way. So quite often we are now talking about the crisis of globalization. Aren't we also supposed to deal with this sport that is the modern state? How it was the modern state incorporated into our realities? So this long-lasting consequences of the colonial imprint is also a question that needs to be addressed to discuss disappropriation, misrepresentation, and quite often this exteriority and ontological impoverishment that is present in our reality. Colonialism ended with independence. For the social legal structure we live in, quite often represents the political administration. Now, getting back to my argument, I think I would get back and call him Raufu because that's why me Raufu. I'm not Professor Mustapha, so I'm sorry. He always told us and reminded us that the contemporary that we are facing for a global, non-liberal world suggests urgency to expand our ways of imagining and organizing ourselves, our communities, economies, policies, our cultural forms in plural of belonging. The questions of sovereignty, ownership, and legitimacy has to address who we are in our diversity. The more realistic way to decolonize, as Raufu would suggest, on a sustainable basis, has to happen by self-defined appropriation, restructuring, and reconstitution. This approach will enable to raise the stakes of ownership and belonging for the downtrodden and marginalized in a participatory, creating space to accommodate the contesting claims and to transform subjects into full citizens. In a way, as our last conversation, it's the way to show that we Africans can give very good examples to solve conflicts in the world. You are Raufu. Thank you for the challenge.
That was very smart. Delegating somebody, I'm not quite sure who, to take care of the time. So I was sort of intimidated by that. But I will stick on my last. That is Jonas Babezi Musinga, who is Coalition for Development and Environment in Uganda. And
I'm very privileged to be one of Africa's scholars, Abdul Mustapha, whose conviction was that scholarship should promote social change on the basis of scientific and critical thought through the pursuit of progressive agenda, the interests of people. As we shall see, we will be seeing the state interests of the people, something that Raufu would not have taken in. Despite the democratization since the 1990s, some African countries have evolved Luswarian garrison states in which specialists of violence have taken over the realm of the civilian state in form of policing, civil intelligence, elections, social services, among other things. And this is antithetical to the theoretical prediction of democratization bandits that democratize government by the civilian control over the military. Instead, we witness militarism in Africa. In this paper, I undertook in-depth qualitative the civilian state structure with military power in Uganda, with parallel from a number of years from 2011 to 2016, specific on elections. And this research, as you will see, reveals a trend of militarism against democratic processes. The garrison state, which Laswell in 1941 envisaged that specialists in violence dominate over diplomacy, civilian bargaining, leading to specialization. The same garrison state focuses on maintaining morale and the public order to socialize danger alongside propaganda and rhetoric about democracy and human rights. Military control, military prowess, and this trend depends on the acceptance of the military model of society. The ability of civilian institutions to resist this military influence, as the military retains relative autonomy from the civilian institutions. The objective condition of conventional security dangers may not obtain in a post-Cold War world, but the current threats like terrorism may provide impetus for the over-securitarization of society, and these features with relevant modifications within that. The puzzle has been that militarization has persisted and taken on new dimensions despite in Uganda in form of periodic elections, active civil society, existence of numerous political parties, good-faced military, the free media, rhetoric on democratization, and the existence of the three arms of government. When you look at Uganda as a country, there is one statement that summarizes the situation of the military in the different spheres of civilian institutions. Journalists at home remarked that if a position is operationally strategic, President Museveni, to his survival in power, Museveni will appoint a soldier to do it. As a result, the military today has a permanent representation in parliament, heads the police, defends, protects all key strategic installations, and has attachés or spies in key ministries. And Museveni is still piling on the militarization of the state. That summarizes today. We note that most spheres of civilian governance in Uganda have had several positions filled with specialists of violence, and that is personnel from the Uganda People's Defense Forces. Like I said earlier on, whereby the leadership of the police, starting from the Inspector General of Police, is occupied, and this process began in 2001 when a general in the name of Kale Kaihura, in the name of Katumba Wamara was appointed to head the Uganda police. He was replaced by another general, and now we have a brigadier who is the deputy. We also note that several positions within the police force have been occupied by the allies of. We also note that the civil intelligence, that is internal security organization, external security organization, are all occupied by police. We have a structure that moves from the village level up to the district level, comprising of officers, intelligence officers, intelligence that is mainly occupied by the military or paramilitary officials. In Uganda has largely been of the military, where is on the streets policing what is happening in the country under pretense of providing extra support to the police force, end up taking over all the operations within the country. Our civil service has not been spared, where registration services, for example, national registration services have also been taken over by the military. Also under the control of the military. Launched the national IDs. He appointed a general under the Ministry of Internal. The same general appointed another colonel to head the operations in the registration cities. The agricultural sector still has fallen prey to the same militarization campaign. We have, previously we had what we used to call the National Advisory Services. And as a result of failure structure of the National Advisory Services, the President declared and gave an takes over. 300 officers of the military were deployed to distribute and provide advisory services, even when they did not have knowledge on agronomy or what really means to the local person. Within the oil and gas sector, the major installations, the exploration activities are under the military, with specific Elite Brigade, the Special Forces Command. Serving military officers are members of cabinet, and this is the existing law that requires that every serving military officer should first resign before they assume a citizen or ordinary office. However, the establishment has been able to twist the parliament to ensure that the same military officers do not have to resign, but be able to still have that dual role in parliament. Within our parliament, we have the permanence of the military, where the military has 10 permanent seats and is always debates that affect matters of national importance. Infrastructure development, where, for instance, recently we've been talking about the standard gauge railway, the military officers to work along with Chinese contractors to ensure that the implementation of the gauge railway also is under the armpit of the military. We also have this military where one of the cultural leaders is a retired and after clashes with an existing king, this retired officer was recalled for further training. Also have another king within the same locality who has been taken on for military training. I went out of brain into the system. So the specialists of violence have occupied all civil or civilian spaces that ordinary citizens would have and probably engaged in order to be able to address their issues and for redress. We note that this practice, takeover of the military, has a number of democratic implications. And I note that to express their opinions without fear of reprisal, including during elections, from agencies of violence, depicts a scenario where politics is above government structures and institutions. The weakening of the state institutions and political party with the state has severely affected the performance of government programs in all service delivery sectors and perpetuated rent-seeking at the highest echelons of the superstructure. As I conclude, within the emergence and consolidation of the garrison state in Uganda, and this is mainly through the penetration of military in, while also retaining presence in the military service and inflicting violence against the ordinary during elections. This trend indicates the resilience of militarism and militarization of society, which has severe democratic implications. To say that the military should remain separate from or not fused with civilian institutions, they do not deserve society, they do not serve societal needs. Militaries can develop systems and allow civilian investors and organizations to adopt and use them. Likewise, private or civilian investors and innovators made technologies which are then by the military for national security. And we are saying the threshold should be where is the problem within the means, just 1 minute, within the means and capacity of civilian institutions to handle. Militaries are the state's strongest institutions and means of last resort to the most complex problems. Would any African democracy or democratization normalize the current ongoing process of everyday governance in Africa and in Uganda in particular? I believe that Raufu would be in such a situation. Thank you.
I have 3 speakers, but the tyranny of time is against us. And here I thought Uganda exported a whole lot of other commodities, but it appears that their major export is militarization to Trump, who also likes generals in all civilian posts. On that note, if people have very urgent, brief questions to our panelists, I will entertain 3 questions. I've been told to stop about half an hour ago, so I am already abusing time. Yes, yes, please. No lectures, very precise panelists. Yeah, well, Kodesria. No, hello, Kodesria. They need, for translation purposes, sorry.
Now, for our presenter on Uganda, which is a wonderful paper, he put in a framework, in a vessel, how we can conceptualize the policy for Uganda? Is it indigenous? Is it describe?
No more other questions? Yes. Yes, can we start with you first? Yeah, and then we'll come, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I stand here as a very proud and grateful student of Professor Raufu Mustapha, and I'd like to pose two lessons he's taught me in my undergraduate years as questions to the panel. One is, how do we reproduce ourselves as social scientists, as social actors? Because Rauf's class was very important to me, but also his lessons outside the classroom was important. He was a mentor. Second is that as we work to theorize about the state, how do we theorize about power in universities? Because he enabled a lot of us become who we are. My husband actually asked me, Chair, with your permission, to tell the entire world how he made him. Because as the former president of the National Association of Nigerian Students, he escaped rustication, and the state laid in wait for him, such that he couldn't find a job after university. But to the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress actually enabled him to take care of his family of 13 siblings and 2 mothers and no father. And I'd like to hear from our panelists today. And to thank you, Kate, for opening your home in Zaria and Oxford to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, same, over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Nasongo from Kenya. My question is to the first speaker. When you look at the profile of African immigrants in any given country, they range from the highly skilled to the lowest. Now, the factors that explain this kind of migration, there is a duality to it. You have push factors from the countries of origin and countries of destination countries. Now, in your view, which factors best explain the migration? Push factors, or are they the pull factors? Thank you.
Okay. So I'll follow the same order in terms of, if you so wish. Yes. We had said 3 questions.
Thank you. This is, I think I can say I'm speaking on behalf of so many of us here. I'm sitting next to Bio, sitting next to a lot of the colleagues here. And this is just a personal note also, to say how much we were privileged to have had people like Raufu in our midst. And Aminata, who we celebrated a few days ago. I don't think we appreciate when we have them around. We tend to take certain things for granted. But people who were always available, right? And had time for everybody, not only for their students, but every time we needed them at Kodazira for anything, they were available, right? And so this is just a way to say one more time again, thank you to Kate and to family, and an opportunity also to say thank you to the family of Aminata Jawo. Thank you to all the families of all those who have given these great people to us. And personally, he was more than a colleague, he was a mentor. And you could just see that you call him at very short notice, he's present. And that one that explains that it was true of all of them. It is because of the commitment they had to the ideals that Kodazira stood for. These are people who understood deeply and profoundly what it meant. I mean, just listen to what Kate was saying about the events that it doesn't go to, the things that people out there, scramble to get to, all the things internationally. And Kodazira is the one place that he would come to every time we needed him. Until that December event that she mentioned, he was about what we must do to make sure that Kodazira stays around. and for a long time. So I just thank you very much. And I just had to say something in addition to this great tribute that has been paid to him already, and what Adigun said. Adigun, I think the citation was excellent. And Kate, thank you very much again. Sorry for...
Thank you. Okay, the 1,000 eyes. Now, you have been asked a question, but you can reflect. I promise not to harass.
There was a pool. I'll be very brief on that. I don't think I'm very competent. I don't think I'm competent enough to prescribe the plan of action on how we can help transform our societies as intellectuals. I think this is something that has come up again and again in this assembly. My view is that intellectuals have to learn to blend practice and theory, that after intellection, we again want to be able to connect to the grassroots, so that completely abstract is reduced to beats that can be understood by people on the ground, common people. And I'm glad from the tribute by Kate and her colleague, I'm able to understand that the late Raufu was that kind of individual who would relate very easily with all manner of people. And I think we can learn something from him. On the question that Professor Nasongo asked about what is paramount between the push and pull factors, I think if I'm to refer to the book that I'm looking at, Dunia Ya, the story told by this particular book about people looking for a better life elsewhere is premised on the fact that too many push factors back home, and many of them have to do with political repression, economic jobs, and this is not new really, that the conditions back home in the continent are so horrible, horrendous, that people would prefer to die in the Mediterranean to living in these death-like conditions. They're like the living dead. So they are only completing a process that began before they left the country. So my take, and I think Said Mohammed has theorized and fictionalized this in a more eloquent way, is that in fact the push factors are more than the pull factors. However, these push factors are heightened by the lack of understanding of the place to which they are headed, because people also have very unrealistic expectations about the place they are going to look for a better life. Thank you.
Thank you. What I found striking by that one of the protagonists had lost his mind. And in my country, that's the only time you can tell the truth to power. You can either be really losing your mind or pretend to have lost your mind so that you can tell to power.
I will be very quick to the question that was posed to me. I think our task is not to be only in the academia, so we have to be outside. We have to be in the society where we belong. Academia, it's one of the environments where we work, but we need to feel the pulse and to interact with our societies in order to contribute to what we have been seeing here, and I totally support that. our main task is to train competent rebels, and rebels are going. So if we don't train people to get the capacity to deep listening, that's what I learned from Raufu, that very patiently listen to me for a whole hour, and at the end give me some insights. And so we need to be humble. We need to learn that we got to a certain position. It's also a position we have to exercise in the best way we can. Either we are on the side of authoritarian, try to contribute to a possible change. And to contribute to a possible change is through training very critical, involved, dedicated young people. And I think that's the only way I can see myself doing it, and never giving up, and when I will be there. And I think the final thing is to be able to train people that from their understanding to be solidary with the world that struggles, with the world that does not accept the hegemony of. So we need really to grasp, to be competent in the sense that we understand the world we live in, that we are solidary with those people that from the global south we want to change and you want to grasp. So that's my suggestion and the way I work.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. There's a question that required me to precisely state what is happening in Uganda. And this is how I would put it. Under normal circumstances, a democratization process would produce a modern civilian government where there is civilian control over the military. In Uganda, however, a semblance of democracy, but with the military in control of practically every sphere of life. And this military is in agriculture, controlling agriculture, doing civil policing, oil and gas. It is everywhere. And the civilian population does not have any conscience of this military. In the end, we are seeing increasing violence, because when you look at the military and the way it is dealing with people, the gunman is not interested in understanding the rights of individuals. He's not interested in, and usually they are following orders that are not civil policing or management of the civilian population. For instance, recently we had riots during the elections in 2011, and resulted in a walked work. The police adopted a policy of shoot to kill against the protesters. And under normal circumstances, we wouldn't expect a police that is not highly penetrated by the military to be having such.
You have a very kind assessment of the police. Perhaps it is the specific case of Uganda, but in my country, they have their own garrisons to deal with. I think we have come to the end of this session, but I want to remind everyone of the continuity of the discussion this morning, that we as social scientists have a rich resource in literature to use for our own work in understanding the lives of everyday people. And as we were told, it has 1,000 eyes, and it brings a whole host of new insights into what's going on in our own continent, and that resource to bring about change. We have also been given the challenge of what do we do with the colonial legacy, the colonial state, that is still very much present, whether we call it something else, the steps and engagements and activities we need to take to at least erode that present sources we need to mobilize and take care of. And in the case of, in the last case, we have been told that although some of our African states are presumably civilian, the military, or what our colleague called the garrison state, is really the reality, and it is not specifically limited to Uganda, or military being so present in state structures, but the militarization of the state is a new reality on the continent. And so how do we deal with these various diverse forms of state structures in our diversity? And what's interesting is that some of the writings of Raufu, who I invite everyone to look at, and it is available online, some of it, and we have been told that his new books are forthcoming. He struggles with those issues that have been raised here. How do you transform a multi-ethnic state structures in our continents, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, in a globe that only enhances these diversities? And so how do we overcome those issues? So on that note, Mr. Executive Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and the panelists. I just need to add a little note that the family of the late Abdul Raufu Mustapha took the decision that some of the books that were forthcoming by the time he passed on and have since been published, all the royalties will be sent to Codesria. So I wanted to take this particular opportunity to thank the family. I've seen at least 2 checks pass on my desk. So it was not just a promise, it's already a reality. The family of the late Abdul Raufu Mustapha. Thank you very much. So we'll take a break for lunch, and I just need colleagues to know that we will resume at 3. We'll resume at 3. And the reason we did that is because when we resume at 3, we will begin on our the lesson, and it will be a non-stop panel until we finish today, and then we will go out for a gala dinner. So we resume at 3, and there will be no coffee break after that. Bon appetit.